Hello, my name is Joel.
And my name is Michael.
Today we are going to be discussing The Animal is Chemical by Hadara Bar-Nadav.
So there are three big themes across Hadara Bar-Nadav's The Animal is Chemical. It's split up into 5 different sections, but realistically, when we were looking over the themes, we kind of split it into 3.
We found that each of the 5 sections falls fairly neatly into each of these 3 categories, which we'll discuss in depth in just a bit. And also how these categories bridge between themselves and how some sections actually discuss other categories better, but still can be a part of their own section. Sounds a bit confusing, but we're going to get into it, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, the way that they mix between each other feels, I don't know, it's almost odd to have sections, but then you look at things like the blank out poems or the blackout poems, and it would feel kind of weird if they were just kept with everything else.
Right.
But yeah, so first up, and I think it makes the most sense to talk about this one first, is Jewish history. Obviously, Hadar Bar-Nadav is a Jewish author and talks a lot about Jewish history.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even in class, weren't you the one that looked up the meaning of Dibbuk first?
Yes.
Yes. Do you want to talk
Was
about
that? Well, you can actually find them. It's presumed that this is going to be a common question, seeing it is the first opening poem titled Dibbuk. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I apologize. It being the first opening poem, I think, is quite powerful because it assumes that readers are going to be like, "What is that?" And that's going to give a lot of context to the author herself. If we actually go to the very back of the book on page 99, we get the notes section. It says the Dibbuk is inspired by Jewish folklore that depicts the Dibbuk as a disembodied spirit which possesses a human host. Women with mental health conditions were often said to be possessed by Dibbuks. So that obviously talks about the Jewish part of her history and aspect, and also the aspects of mental health, which are huge in this book. And we'll get into that in the blackout poems that Michael mentioned earlier.
I think that even right here, mental health is already playing a huge section of the meaning because of specific phrases like my long Semitic nose and curly hair like a calligraphy of barbed wire. Phrases like that, and diamonds line my eye sockets, diamonds in my fever-lit brain, my neck a fat matchstick. It feels like Hadar Bar-Nadav is using this intro poem as a way to take back traditionally anti-Jewish imagery, goblin imagery that is used to attack Jewish communities. So the fact that she opens up the poem with, or opens up the book with a poem that is at once an anti-Jewish stereotype, but also a Jewish folk legend.
And in a similar vein, it's something that this first poem I can kind of see is the fact the distinction between Judaism as a race and as a religion, because that is a distinction that's ultimately not made a lot, but is an important distinction when we're talking about Jewish history and whatnot. And of course, you can be a Jewish individual but not practice Judaism. And for example, I think a lot of these poems, from what I understand, none of them discuss the God of the Torah. Like even for example, in the first poem, Dibbuk, a myth in which a god sets us on fire and then sets us free. A god spelled in a lowercase letter. Now, does that say anything? No, because she could just be doing it for artistic reasonings. But I think it is something to think about when this is a book that deals primarily with Jewish history and with an author who very much identifies herself with Jewish culture and her presumably Jewish culture and her own Jewish race, but does not necessarily strictly, at least in the text, identify with the God of the Torah.
And I think that distinction between Judaism as a cultural heritage versus a religion is very prevalent in Wolfchild. The poem on page 7, Joel actually thankfully did a lot of research on this and found some good information on the Baba Yar massacre that happened in Kiev in 1941.
So what Bar-Nadav does a lot in this collection is she has the title, but then under the title, she has what I don't know what you would call a subtitle. I say a subtext that essentially provides some context either about the poem or provides kind of another an artistic way to kind of give a hint to what the poem might be discussing. On page 7 of section 1, you get the poem Wolfchild, but underneath that title, it mentions Baba Yar, Kiev, September 1941. I think a lot of people think about the Holocaust as like kind of just this one thing, and of course a terrible thing and a very large, very huge massacre. But we don't. We kind of generalize things altogether. I think that's just one of the faults of human nature that we need to work on. And I think doing this research kind of helps with that. So the Babi Yar was a site of a ravine. These Jewish victims, fully undressed, just humiliated, and then shot in small groups inside this ravine. That was over a 2-day period. 33,771 Jews were massacred at this location over that 2-day period. It's important to note this because it makes the poem make a lot more sense. We have a child who's been left for dead in the forest of emerald dreams with a nightmare of the ravine, the nightmare ravine. And they talk about the literal dimensions of the ravine, 30 meters wide, 150 meters long, and 15 meters deep. 15 meters deep and deep and deep.
Yeah, repeating deep multiple times, I feel like emphasizes the amount of bodies that are there. I think Joel made a really good point in the generalization of the Holocaust, and Bar-Nadav really refuses to do that, talking about, this instance in and of itself is an atrocity. So the Holocaust is not an atrocity. It is a collection of atrocities.
A 2-day instance, by the way. Like
yeah.
2 days. This was a week. This was a weekend.
Yeah, this was a Saturday, Sunday for somebody.
Yeah.
I think that the interpretation of Wolfchild that I came to was one of growing up Jewish, like Bar-Nadav presumably has, and how that sort of latches onto you as you grow up. You start to hear these stories. You hear specific instances of Jewish history. And I have to imagine with the Holocaust being as prevalent in history as it is and how impactful in the Jewish diaspora as it is, that a lot of those stories end up starting and stopping with instances like the Babi Yar Kiev massacre, talking about family members, and you get to one of your cousins and then you just have to say, well, they didn't make it out of Kiev. I think Wolfchild is talking about growing up and hearing all those stories and imagining what it must be like to come out of that history. Now, this might be a very sudden and abrupt change, but to be fair, it does feel like that in the collection.
It does.
Up next in the collection are the blackout poems, the sections where Bar-Nadav is talking about prescription medication and is blacking out the liner text from the packets that they're received in order to make sort of mixed media poetry almost. A lot of these instances are talking about chronic disease and the diseases prevalent in society. There's, COVID, depression, anxiety, rape culture. There's a lot of little instances of things like that aren't necessarily hounded, but are brought to our attention very succinctly.
Right now, I'd like to discuss these particular sections, because these sections could easily be back to back, but Bar-Nadav chooses to have one section, basically split them in half, have one section of blackout poems, and then split that poem with another poem with a theme that we're going to discuss after this, and then go right back to the blackout poems. And so that is a very purposeful decision to make. This is the section that quite consistently has a lot of those subtexts like we saw in Wolfchild, where Bar-Nadav mentions the medication from which she is deriving these texts to black out. A lot of these medications have their two distinctions, and I kind of liken it to like how an animal has like a scientific name and then a name that we refer it to. For example, I feel like fluoxetine versus Prozac, right?
I mean, the animal is chemical after all.
The animal is chemical. Which actually, the namesake of the poem is in one of these sections, and we'll get into that in a second. We have, of course, Zoloft. Everyone knows Zoloft if you're my age. That's a joke.
I love Zoloft.
We're going to cut that. So Zoloft is an SSRI and antidepressant, treats OCD and anxiety and depression in many cases. Flexerol is prescription muscle relaxant, and Topradex is the for bacterial eye infection. Dexamethasone to treat inflammatory, allergic, and autoimmune disorders. We have Panicure. This is the namesake of the poem. This is the poem titled "The Animal is Chemical," and this is a medication used for treating parasites in dogs. And then finally, we have Zofran, which is a medication to treat particularly those individuals who have gone through chemotherapy and radiation. All of these medications share one thing in common. So yeah, all these are prescription. When we originally read this book for class, I assumed that when drugs mentioned in this context were illegal substances and addictive substances, and I thought kind of the title, the animal is chemical, being like the animal of addiction, right? That is not, in fact, what Bar-Nadav is trying to do.
Yeah, I think what Bar-Nadav is trying to do with the animal is chemical as a title is trying to take away some of our like high-handedness with the morality sometimes, pretending like, because there's this vibe around talking about World War II where it's like, oh, I would never do that, or I can't believe they did that, when it should be easily understandable, not why they did it, but that they did it, like, because humans just are not they're not always good creatures.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what your stance is on whether humans are inherently morally good or bad, like, it happened. No matter how much Holocaust denial you put on the media cycle, it happened. Like, people were slaughtered, people were massacred, and the animal is chemical. Yeah. Like, it can happen because people aren't, agents of divine goodness.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what Bar-Nadav is trying to get across with that title.
Yeah.
And speaking of animals and chemicals, let's talk about machinery a little bit. So there's one poem that stuck out to us quite a lot on page 20, that being "Death by Design," where the company Topf and Sons is mentioned by name. One of not an entirely rare instance, but at least for this collection, but somewhat.
Yeah, so like what Michael was saying, the Death by Design poem was something that really stuck out to me in particular when I was doing my research, because it mentions the company Topf and Sons, and I was even going to mention this poem as a reference to the acts that the Nazis did to dispose of the bodies by incineration. And the line right before Topf and Sons is mentioned is "the fire has nearly erased me." So I thought, oh, like this is like fire. I assumed that to be part of that discussion, and then right after that, it was like, okay, this is definitely not even interpretation. This is exactly what we're talking about. Quotation on 20 by Bar-Nadav: "Ovens by Topf and Sons, high capacity designs for death." So one thing that we don't really think about a lot is companies being in such heinous activities, products being commissioned by the Nazi Party. In this case, we have Topf and Sons. A lot of these companies that were helped assist the Third Reich in the attempted elimination of the Jewish race did not face any retribution. They were, and this is according to the Holocaust Encyclopedia, they are more referred to as desk murderers, which I take to mean kind of offstanding, like just bystanders doing what they were told to do. The co-owner, Ludwig Topf, committed suicide, and his note stated, quote, "I was always decent, not decent enough."
Yeah, obviously not true. I think that what Death by Design is really getting at with all of the aspects of the industrialization of murder calls back to the medication talk. Things that are more relevant now than ever with discussions of insulin prices, of healthcare. Just the phrase that came to us when we were talking about this was, you grow to learn that the forces of the world aren't here for you. And I think that Hadara Bar-Nadav, as a member of the Jewish community, learned that likely quicker than a lot of people had to, especially as both a Jewish woman and a chronic sufferer of some kind, of any kind, really. That the world, while it may have help for you, is not here to help you. And while those two are, I think, the biggest main themes, the most general that kind of permeates the whole thing is grief and loss in family. We just have a couple instances here I'll just run through, like Loop in Dirt and Gold, talks about either proverbial or realistic miscarriage. That's pretty on the nose. But more interestingly, I think from this perspective, are the object poems. Things like "This House is a Difficult Text," and every object is someone. And these poems show just a connection between family, personal identity, and the physical objects that we hold dear or that we associate with people. And these things feel a little like, on the outside, they may seem consumerist, but these things take a new meaning when you're talking about, a community that has had their teeth ripped out for gold.
Which is mentioned. I don't remember the exact poem, but that is mentioned.
Yeah. More than once, I think. But these things, the Jewish community historically has not been allowed to have these objects, has not been allowed to have these memories or these connections to family. So to take these things back and to say, no, these objects represent my family members and I will treasure them, I think is a very strong message from Bar-Nadav, and makes for a very powerful third pillar to the major themes. It is an incredibly powerful read that really makes you think in new ways about growing up into a system that historicizes your suffering, specifically yours. I think that's about it. I liked it.
Yeah. Kind of interesting combination of things, but they're put together in a way that feels natural and feels as though these poems belong in the same collection. The Animal is Chemical by Hadara Bar-Nadav.
I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
Michael gives it a 4 out of 5.
I give it a 4 out of 5. Joel gives it nothing. Joel hates it.